All right, Yanick, you ready?
Yeah.
All right. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. I am very excited to have as my guest today, Yanick Steinbeck. Yanick, welcome.
Guy, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
So Yanick was a client of EMDR and experienced the profound impact of bilateral stimulation firsthand. He created bilateralstimulation.io at the beginning of COVID to enable his former therapist to practice EMDR online. Then something unexpected happened. The tool went viral in the EMDR community. 1 week after launch, the site briefly went offline because there was so much traffic. What happened next astonished him even more. He began receiving heartwarming emails from therapists and clients all around the world, people in the US, China, Chile, Uganda. His humble BLS tool was spreading all across the globe. All right, Yanick, welcome to the podcast. Before we get going here, share with the listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
Thanks, Guy. So I'm originally from Switzerland, born and raised, and then moved to Berlin, in Germany, where I lived for 8 years. And currently I am in between conferences in the US and decided to spend some time and work from Mexico City. So that's why, if you see the video, there's quite nice weather in the background.
Nice.
And then in August, I'll be back in the US at the EMDR conference.
Awesome. So, I mean, just even within that small bio, that's pretty amazing. So let's get, how the heck did this start? How did you get into this field?
Right. So a couple of years ago, I was a client of EMDR, and I really benefited from EMDR lastingly and profoundly. And I brought up back then in 2019 the idea to my former therapist, like, hey, what if you do this online? You know, it's such a great therapy. I did it with him in person. What if you do it online? You increase the access to it to people globally and remotely. And you could, if you're familiar with EMDR, you could have the visual bilateral stimulation by having something on the screen that moves. You could have the auditory bilateral stimulation with sounds playing left and right, and you could have the tactile bilateral stimulation by plugging a device into your computer that then vibrates left and right, and the therapist can control that. And my former therapist said, like, oh, Yanick, you know, that sounds great, but honestly, nobody needs that. Nobody's doing EMDR online. Nobody's doing therapy online. And so it's probably just a nice idea. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, that's fair enough. And then a couple of years later, flash forward, COVID comes, and he messages me and he's like, hey, long time no speak. Remember this thing you told me about back in the day about doing EMDR online? Well, that would be really useful now. So I literally spent the first weekend of lockdown building the initial version of our online bilateral stimulation software for my former therapist. And I was working at the time as a software engineer. So my background is I worked in software engineering, product management, business development, different technology startups. So that was kind of right up my wheelhouse. And then having been a client myself, I had at the time at least a superficial understanding of EMDR. So that's what, yeah.
Let me pause you here because you're saying a lot of good stuff. I want to make sure I get. So why do you don't have to go into it personally too much, but why EMDR initially? I mean, had you tried other therapies or?
So I did try other therapies. I mean, I was suffering from increasingly severe episodic depression, where at the beginning it was maybe a day or two, and then later it turned into kind of episodes of weeks where I just wasn't able to sleep or eat or be productive. And I ignored it for like a long time. And then I started trying like different therapies, talk therapy, CBT, and it never really got sorted out. And then I was hitting a particularly bad time where like the episodes turned into just weeks of misery. And I was like, okay, I think I need to actually fix that. And then somebody recommended EMDR to me. I didn't really know much about it at the time. I kind of was at a point where I was like, okay, I'll try anything, like just just, I mean, I didn't have much agency or energy. I'm just like, okay, just give it to me. And then EMDR really was the key, I would say, for me to lastingly overcome what I didn't know at the time was the trauma behind my symptoms. So this was 2019. I did I think something like 4 months of pretty intense EMDR, and I haven't had a depressive episode since. So
Oh
it's
my.
been
Wow.
incredible for me. It's been like profound, lasting. I walked into it not really knowing what to expect, and certainly the first time my therapist put a light bar in front of me and told me to like follow the dot, I was like, well, why am I like looking at this dot? But then, you know, as it goes, after a couple sessions, things started to come up that maybe I didn't even remember anymore. I was able to shift my perspective, shift my beliefs in a way that wasn't possible before. So
Oh my gosh.
I really strongly believe in EMDR, and it helped me a lot. And I'm glad it's now spreading more and more and helping more and more people worldwide.
That is amazing. I mean, it's so, I'm so happy for you that you experienced that relief. It sounds like you had a really good therapist also.
Yes, yes. I'm eternally grateful to him. I'm still in touch with him every now and then. Um, Also because he's still using the software, which yeah, now turned into this bigger thing. So yeah, it's kind of crazy to me how, you know, this therapy which was recommended to me turned into now basically, you know, this big thing in my life that I dedicate like most of my time to.
So let's go back. So he contacts you a couple years later and says, "Hey, Yannick, you know that idea you had. Let's talk about it." And you were like, what? It's one thing to be able to have the knowledge to be able to, work on something like that, but you took some steps forward. You were like, okay, let's do this. What inspired you to do that?
Well, I think the good thing was that when he approached me, because we already discussed this before and like I thought about it before, I had kind of a picture in my mind about what such a software would look like, you know? And then when he approached me, I was like, okay, now there is this urgent need. There is all these, you know, hundreds of thousands of therapists worldwide that practice EMDR that overnight are now forced to find a way to do it virtually. And they need a tool for the bilateral stimulation. Like there's all these video chat solutions, and they turned also at the beginning of COVID, started to be very good. You know, like video chat. I don't know if you remember, before COVID was kind of a mess, right? It was quite
Mm-hmm.
unreliable. Now, because everybody worldwide needed it, it got quite good. But what was lacking was this bilateral stimulation. So I had a rough picture in my mind for what such a software could look like, and then I sat down first weekend of lockdown and acted out that vision and put it into a very basic, very simple software, which at the very first version just covered the visual bilateral stimulation, just a dot that moves on the screen that the therapist can control at different speeds. The client can watch it. The therapist can change certain appearance characteristics like the color.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really super simple. And I mean, in a way, it was simple out of necessity because I was like, okay, I have 1 weekend to get this done, you know, because I have a day job like Monday to Friday. But in hindsight, this simplicity turned out to be a virtue because most of these therapists weren't particularly excited about technology or particularly excited about some complicated piece of technology that they now have to integrate into their therapy. So the fact that the tool was so simple and that it was available online for free, I think is what then caused it to go viral, right? Like I built the original version, I shared it with my former therapist, kind of forgot about it. I was like, oh, it's this, you know, weekend project, this COVID project, this little thing that might be used by like 3 people in the world. I mean, even the name, like the domain bilateralstimulation.io, you know, it's not very catchy, it's not very short. At the time, I was just like, okay, which domain is available? Bilateralstimulation.com, already taken. Bilateralstimulation.io, not taken. Okay, I'll take that one. Doesn't matter. It's going to be used by 3 people anyways. Well, it
Right.
turns out it did matter. But anyways, I shared it with him, and then a week later, I opened my email inbox, and it's just dozens of emails of people from all over the world, and some of them are complaining that the site is down. And I was like, what, the site is down? Well,
So
how many
he had
people are on
shared,
there?
obviously shared it with someone else
Yeah.
or other
So
people.
so he shared it on some Facebook groups and some email lists, and then people shared it more and more because everybody was overnight forced to find a way to do the bilateral stimulation
Oh
online.
my
And people
gosh.
try to do things like, oh, I'll move my finger in front of the camera. Oh, it turns out that's very blurry. Oh, I'll put my light bar in front of the camera. It turns out that's also not so great. So when this tool came along, it was like, oh, here is like a free and simple way. You don't need to create an account. You don't need to register. You don't need to pay. You just go to this website, you share the link with your client, and then you can do the bilateral stimulation, and it's like easy. And that spread like very quickly through all these channels, you know, that EMDR therapists use to communicate with each other. And it was also
Wow.
this feeling of like, hey, we're all in this together. Let's help each other find ways to bring this online. And
So this is so interesting. I mean, as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, there's so many like pieces that were in place for this to happen, right? I mean, you had your own experience, you had a pretty incredible, you had, first of all, really severe symptoms that were relieved so kind of drastically by this experience. And that, from what you're saying, really inspired you to get going. And within the context of COVID and people just, starting therapy online and everything, it just, everything was in place for
yeah,
this to
and
happen.
like even in terms of what I did before, it kind of all came together perfectly. Like I originally studied business. I worked on the business side of like technology startups. I then started learning how to program, became a software engineer, worked in like the software engineering execution and management. I worked in a company where I was in charge of their US rollout. And it was a healthcare company. So I learned a lot about like US healthcare and the payer system in the US and like how that all fits together. And then here I am at the beginning of COVID, building this kind of software that started out very simple and then grew and grew and grew, and kind of brought together all my previous experiences in a very fulfilling way.
And
So yeah,
in
it's
an
been a journey.
unexpected way too,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So what happens? Okay, walk us through. So um things start to go viral. You start to get these emails from people from all over the world. What happens next?
So I'm still working as a software engineer at the time, and what started as a weekend project is now turning into this kind of side project on nights and weekends. You know, like I get a lot of feature requests. I get a lot of little tech issues that I need to fix. I start getting donations like unprompted. I remember this email I get
Wow.
from PayPal, where because I put my email on the website in terms of, hey, if you have an issue, please email me. And then what people started doing is just sending like money to that email. I didn't have a PayPal account. So PayPal emails me like, hey, people are sending you money, please create an account. I was like, wow, that's crazy.
Oh my God.
So I create a PayPal account. I start getting some donations. I start spending like nights and weekends on extending, improving the tool, you know, adding auditory bilateral stimulation, adding a whole bunch of features based on what people ask for, making it more reliable, making it work on like really old browsers, making it work on phones and all these things.
Mm.
And then it just organically kept growing, and it was still considered. I always thought, well, I guess we all thought at the time, you know, oh, COVID is going to be over in like a couple months, and then this project is going to be over, and for the duration of COVID, I'm going to spend my nights and weekends to maintain it and give people this kind of free and simple accessible resource to do this therapy online. And I didn't think about it in terms of a business at the time. But then COVID kept on going, and then also the growth of the user base kept on going up. And at some point, I had 5,000 therapists using it. And I was like,
Oh
that's a
my
crazy
gosh.
number, you know, like I didn't do any marketing or anything. And then at 5,000 therapists and kind of no end in sight for the pandemic, I was like, okay, maybe I should turn this into a business. And then I had Benjamin join, one of my best friends, and we knew each other for a long time. We both worked in the kind of technology startup sector for many years, and we always had this dream of like running something together. And we met actually in the US in when we were both exchange students in Los Angeles. and he's Austrian, I'm Swiss, so we have like this Alps mountain connection. And then he joined, and I quit my job and I started working on bilateralstimulation.io full time. And we said, okay, let's actually turn this from kind of side project into a proper organization. And that's when we started doing a couple things. So we said, okay, we always want to keep a basic version that is free. We always want to keep this as a tool that new therapists can use, that therapists in developing countries can use to treat clients remotely for free. But we also want to go beyond the very basic free version. We want to build a paid version of the software that has more features, more capabilities, more ways to do bilateral stimulation, tax working memory. So it basically is the same software, but the paid version unlocks extra features. So from the moment when we turned this from kind of side project into business and organization, we said, okay, we want to always keep the free version available. We always want to enable people to do bilateral stimulation remotely for free. But in order to have this be a sustainable project that, you know, keeps on serving people for years and decades, we need a paid version to pay the bills. And this paid version unlocks extra features, such as having the visual BLS go diagonal or in an infinity shape as opposed to only horizontal, such as child-friendly motives. So we have a lot of child therapists using it, and they appreciate this feature that we added, which is you can turn the dot into like an animal or an emoji. And
cool.
that has been very popular. We recently added, based on popular demand, background images. So one of the professional paid features is you can have an image in the background. You know, it can be a beautiful nature image, like a waterfall or a forest or a mountain range, or it can be, if you're working with exposure therapy, a triggering image such as a hospital, a fire, a bar. And what we're releasing soon is the ability to upload your own background image. That's been a very popular request because people sometimes want to do very individualized, either soothing kind of calm places or like triggering exposure kind of images that are very specific to the patient that they're treating. So soon you'll be able to like upload your own background image on which the bilateral stimulation is then projected. And then we have a couple other things like HIPAA wise, if you have a paid account with us, we'll sign a BAA with you, which is important to some organizations. And you can save your BLS settings for each client, so you don't have to note them down and remember them, but the system saves them for you. And then lastly, when you share your session link with your client, you can kind of think of it like a Zoom link, right? Like you send a Zoom link to a client, they click on it. Similarly, you create a link in our system to send to your client for the bilateral stimulation. And in the paid version, that link is customizable. You could, you know, make it like / the trauma therapist / guy, as opposed to some random link. So that's some of the features of the paid version. But like when we started working on it, all of that was kind of unclear and still crystallizing, and we kind of learned about what people want and need from these conversations we had with all these therapists. And then one thing that kept coming up, and that was years ago, is, hey, we want to do tactile bilateral stimulation online. We want to do tactile EMDR online. And I think for the longest time, we kind of hand waved it away. We're like, well, this sounds complicated. We don't know how to do this. Like, this sounds like it needs some hardware. We're not hardware guys. We don't know how that works. But then it kept coming up so frequently, it turned into like our most popular feature request that we said, okay, well, what if we were to build a device for tactile EMDR? And then this kind of journey started again of like,
now,
oh, let's
Yanick,
experiment.
if I may, explain to our listeners what tactile
Right.
stimulation is for those who don't know.
So with EMDR, there's different theories for why it works, right? And different ways in which people use external modalities to distract your brain or to tax your working memory or to induce this right-left stimulation, all of it with the goal of putting your brain in a state where it is then easier for you to overcome your trauma, easier for you to reframe your beliefs around the trauma. And the most common modality that people use to put your brain into that desired state is bilateral stimulation, so stimulation left and right. And historically, it has been eye movements. That's also in the name, right? EMDR, eye movements, desensitization, and reprocessing. Later on, people discovered that you can also use auditory bilateral stimulation, sounds left and right, and that also works. And then even later, people said, well, what about another sense? What about tactile? You know, what if you tap people historically in person, left and right, on their shoulders, on their knees? What if people tap themselves in terms of the butterfly hug? And people discovered, oh, actually, that also works. That's soothing, that's calming, that is working as a modality to put your brain into that desired state. And then at some point, people develop devices for it. So if you go to an EMDR therapist in their office, they might have a device, two things, handheld kind of buzzers that they put in your hands. They vibrate left and right for this tactile bilateral stimulation. And what we have developed is our own buzzers that vibrate left and right, but that work over the internet, that work remotely. So as the client, I connect them to my laptop, and then you as the therapist can control them remotely. And we have, you know, people doing that a couple hours apart from each other in the US. We have people doing that across the Atlantic, you know, across the Pacific, with people being in different continents, and that is not possible. So you can now do this tactile EMDR virtually.
That sounds amazing. I think I shared with you previously that I was a client also and did EMDR with and bilateral stimulation, and I my therapist did use those handheld things that were really really good. So it's interesting to me, Yannick. You know, as we're talking here, you know, before COVID hit, a lot of therapists were like, you know, I'm not going to do online therapy, telehealth. There's no way, it can't be done. Even if it is, it's not going to work. So how do you talk about, how do you explain the benefits of bilateral stimulation over the internet? I mean, I'm sure there are some people out there going, okay, sounds good, but is it as effective?
It's a great question. Yeah, it's a great question. And I totally understand also, well, there's multiple concerns, right? There's people being concerned about the effectiveness of it. There's people being concerned about putting more technology in the process, which is not necessarily a good thing, you know, because it can break down, you know, like what if the video breaks down? What if your bilateral stimulation program breaks down? How do I even use this? Will the client understand how to use it? Like people historically, I think, have been afraid to add technology to their therapy because they feel like it's something outside of their control, right? Like if I'm in a room with my client and I talk to them face to face, and I might even do the bilateral stimulation like manually without a device, you know, then it's all in my control. And as soon as I introduce technology, that adds this like variable to it and this uncertainty of, is it going to work? Is the client going to get it? And then with virtual also, you know, is it effective? And I think these are all like valid concerns. And then I think when COVID came, it forced everybody's hand, and everybody was kind of forced to, you know, find out and try it out. And I think pretty quickly, first on a clinical, first in the clinical community, and then later also validated by research, it became clear that, well, it works, it's effective. Maybe for some people, it's even more effective because they can do it from the comfort of their own home. They don't have to commute. There's less no-shows because, well, if I'm very depressed, I'm in a very bad state, am I really going to take, you know, the 1-2 hour journey to my therapist? And people can do it when they're in a more comfortable mindset, maybe more kind of in their window of tolerance because they're at home or they're in the location that they desire to be in. So I think clinically people very quickly were like, oh, this actually works, and sometimes even works better. And then research-wise, as the research started to catch up and do studies, they were like, oh, actually, it's also, yeah, we can confirm this works. So the effectiveness question, I think, is kind of resolved now. There is still the question of like personal preference, you know, and certainly there's therapists who still very much prefer sitting in front of people in person and doing it in person, and I totally understand that. And we have been trying to also make our tools more suitable for in-person therapy, and many therapists also use our tools for in-person therapy, but there is still a lot of value in remote therapy, right? And there is value in it for the therapist in terms of being able to work from home, being able to spend time with their family, being able to enjoy the benefits of remote working that many people have learned to enjoy. But there is especially also benefits for the clients, right? They don't have to commute. Many of them might be immobile. We get a lot of emails from clients saying like, hey, I'm in a wheelchair. I could not possibly meet my therapist in person more than like once a month. Now, being able to do this remotely really opened the possibility of EMDR up to me and made it more accessible. And I think that is the key. Like in a world where we still have kind of an undersupply of therapists, and we still have people waiting a long time for therapy, and maybe also geographical kind of bottlenecks in terms of, oh, the town that I'm at, the village that I'm at doesn't have the therapy that I need. I think it's super important to have a way to do it location independent, to do it online, and to increase the accessibility of it through that.
Yeah, really exciting, especially that example of that person in the wheelchair. My God, it just frees up so much therapy for them and possibilities. So let's just be clear here. So is this tool specifically for EMDR therapists?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
So we are focused on EMDR, and we are also specifically focused on a tool being a tool for therapists as opposed to self-application.
Okay. And so if therapists are interested, therapists listening to this, they should what? Go to your website, and what will they see there?
Right. So if you visit bilateralstimulation.io, you will see our free BLS tool that you can use today without installation, without sign up, without registration, to provide visual and auditory bilateral stimulation to your clients in the course of EMDR therapy. And it is originally developed for telehealth and virtual, and that's where it works extremely well. But we also have, as many therapists go back to a hybrid kind of setup, an increasing number of therapists that use it in office, and we have like tutorials on the website for how all of that works. If you are interested in tactile bilateral stimulation, you can visit our website, click on tactile, learn more about our buzzers, and order them. And we also have actually special deals for listeners of the trauma therapist. So you can get you can always use our free BLS tool without registration or anything, but as a trauma therapist listener, you can get a 60-day free trial of our paid professional software that unlocks all the features, as well as a special discount on the tactile buzzers. And if you want to take advantage of that, then visit bls.tools. So you just go to your browser, you type, you hit enter, and it will bring you straight to the special benefits.
Okay, so once again, that's just bls.tools. Type that in the browser, and that'll take you right there. Awesome. Wow. So inspiring, man. Your story is just pretty incredible. It's like you've got to go on Shark Tank and talk about this. I mean, it's that like amazing. It's so inspiring. All right, Yanick. Awesome. What's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
Right. So I always love talking to EMDR therapists and people in the space about any ideas, feedback, critique, or partnerships, collaborations. And you can reach me by email, Yanick at bilateralstimulation.io. Yanick is spelled Y-A-N-I-C-K. I think you'll also see this in the show notes, and it's at bilateralstimulation.io. You'll also find this on the website, and yeah, I'll reply to every single email. Always happy to hear from you. And yeah, thanks for having me, Guy.
Awesome. It was a pleasure. I'm excited to get this out there. All right, Yanick, take care.
You too. Cheers.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.